Everything you know about the 20th century can be traced back to a single letter, not a law, not a war, a letter. In 1907, the historical German leader applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna and was rejected.
His real name will not be mentioned in this story. Instead, he will be referred to as Hans.
That rejection pushed an ordinary man to the margins of society, from humiliation to resentment, and from resentment to power. Millions would die because a small committee decided he was not good enough. But time still carries. Before we begin, take a moment. If stories about cause and consequence fascinate you, if you believe that small decisions can reshape entire centuries, you're in the right place. This channel exists to explore how history bends, not through grand events, but through quiet choices that go unnoticed until it's too late. This is the butterfly effect. If this kind of storytelling resonates with you, follow the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Every viewer carries a different history. Every story creates another. Miriam was alone in her classroom after hours, surrounded by unfinished sketches and the quiet frustration of students still learning how to see. She reviewed drawings slowly, stopping where effort existed but direction did not. As a Jewish art professor in the United States, she understood something history often ignores. Rejection does not erase ambition, it reshapes it. Art, she believed, was not salvation, but structure, a way to guide restless minds before anger found another path. The interruption came without noise or light. Time did not break. It paused. The hum of the room vanished, and depth dissolved until space felt uncertain. When Cronos spoke, his voice did not echo, it settled. He explained that time was not linear but branching, creating worlds with every decision. Miriam's reality would remain untouched. Her task was to create another. One change, one divergence, no return until the task was complete. Cronos did not choose Miriam for heroism or virtue. He chose her because she understood influence without force. She knew how proximity shaped people before certainty hardened. She would not replace anyone or confront history directly. She would become someone adjacent, close enough to matter, invisible enough to endure. Her knowledge of art, rejection, and fragile ambition was essential. Cronos showed her no future of success, only the certainty of failure if she did nothing. The instructions were precise, but never delivered as steps. Cronos spoke in conditions, what must happen, what must not happen too soon. He warned her that resistance was inevitable, and that even success would be followed by failure, not as punishment, but balance. Time, he said, does not tolerate clean victories. Every alteration demands compensation. Miriam asked if the new world would be better. Cronos did not answer. Miriam did not ask if she could refuse. She understood refusal had already passed. She asked only who she would be. Cronos gave her a name, Anna, a young woman in Vienna, an aspiring artist with no remarkable past and no recorded future, someone allowed to fail without consequence. Miriam would keep her memories and awareness, but she would be bound by the limits of the era. Influence would come slowly, through patience and silence. As the classroom returned, the lights, the air, the weight of her body, certainty settled in. Cronos did not say goodbye. Time folded inward, opening space for another beginning. Somewhere in 1907, an academy still stood. An examination room waited. A young man carried his drawings, unaware his future had begun to fracture. Miriam closed her eyes as the present dissolved, knowing that when she opened them again, she would be Anna. Anna arrived in Vienna without drama. No light, no sound, no sense of transition. One moment, there was nothing, and then there were streets, voices, cold air, and movement. German came naturally to her, forming in her mouth without effort. Her memories remained intact, her classroom, her students, her former life. The past did not erase her identity. It simply placed it inside another body, another year. The city felt alive in a way history books never captured. Carriages passed, conversations overlapped, and life continued unaware of what it would become. Anna walked slowly, absorbing details she knew would vanish in other timelines. This was Vienna before catastrophe, before humiliation, before desperation hardened into ideology. Every ordinary moment felt fragile, balanced on a future that had not yet been triggered. As she moved through the streets, memory intruded, not imagination, memory. She remembered what would follow if she failed. A continent dragged into war, a defeated nation stripped of dignity, economic collapse, resentment, and a generation searching for someone to blame. These events were not distant possibilities to her. They were recollections of a world she had already lived in. Her mind returned again and again to the images Cronos had shown, without spectacle. Cities reduced to ash, borders redrawn by force, entire families erased from records and memory. She remembered how hatred, once given structure, became efficient, how ideology fed on humiliation. These were not the consequences of a single decision, but they depended on it. One failure was enough. Anna understood now why Cronos had warned her. Knowledge did not bring comfort, it brought pressure. Every step she took felt heavy with implication. She was not here to stop a war directly. She was here to prevent a trajectory from ever forming. The danger was not a single man, but the version of him that history would eventually allow to exist. That night, Anna stood alone in her rented room, listening to a city unaware of its future. Somewhere nearby, a young man was preparing his drawings, convinced his destiny waited behind institutional doors. She did not know him yet. She had not met him. But she knew exactly who he would become if she failed. And for the first time, the weight of the mission settled fully into her silence. The examination hall was quieter than Anna expected. Rows of desks, portfolios resting like confessions waiting to be judged. She took her seat without urgency, aware that this moment mattered less for the result than for the proximity it would create. Across the room, she noticed Hans immediately, not by his face but by his posture, rigid, guarded, convinced that this room would decide his worth. As the exam began, Anna worked carefully, not poorly, not well enough. She allowed hesitation where confidence should have been, softened lines that could have been decisive. Every choice was deliberate. Failure, she knew, had to feel earned. Around her, pencils moved quickly. Hans worked intensely, absorbed, as if effort alone could bend judgment in his favor. Paragraph 03. When the results were posted, disappointment spread unevenly. Some faces collapsed, others hardened. Anna read her name among those rejected and felt relief disguised as loss. Nearby, Hans stood still, reading the list repeatedly, as if expecting it to change. The silence between them carried more weight than words. Shared failure, Anna realized, did not need explanation to become connection. They spoke outside, not immediately, not dramatically. Hans broke the silence first, questioning the criteria, not the institution. He spoke of misunderstanding, of taste, of how talent was often recognized too late. Anna listened more than she spoke. She agreed just enough. Failure, when acknowledged together, softened its edges. Hans did not rage. He analyzed. He spoke of studying, of returning, of proving them wrong through discipline. There was hunger in his words, but also doubt. Anna suggested preparation, structure, time. Nothing radical, nothing prophetic, just the idea that effort could be guided instead of abandoned. They parted with an unspoken agreement to meet again. As Anna walked away, she felt the subtle shift Cronos had promised. The change was small, invisible. The exam had failed her, as planned. But something else had succeeded. A path had been delayed, redirected not by force but by companionship. The first thread of a different future had been woven. Their meetings began without ceremony. Small rooms, borrowed tables, daylight filtered through dusty windows. Anna structured the sessions gently, never as instruction, always as exchange. Hans arrived prepared, almost defensive, as if effort itself were armor. He spoke little at first, concentrating on lines and proportions. Art, in those hours, was not expression. It was discipline. And discipline kept his thoughts from drifting elsewhere. Anna noticed his contradictions quickly. Precision in buildings, impatience with figures, confidence followed by sudden doubt. He was sensitive to criticism, but hungry for it when offered carefully. She adjusted without revealing why. Guidance, she knew, worked best when it felt earned. Hans was not cruel, he was rigid, fearful of being dismissed again. That fear shaped everything he touched. He spoke of Vienna as if it owed him recognition, not in anger, but in expectation. Anna countered quietly, reframing failure as information rather than judgment. She emphasized repetition, observation, restraint, principles she had taught for years. Hans resisted at times, questioning whether softness weakened intent. Anna did not argue. She demonstrated. Letting results speak reduced conflict better than correction. There were moments of calm, neither expected. Shared silence while sketching, brief laughter at mistakes. Hans relaxed when focus narrowed to form and structure. The future had no space in those moments. Only the present existed. Anna recognized this as fragile balance, art occupying the place where obsession might otherwise grow. Still, tension lingered beneath progress. Hans grew attached to his own interpretations, skeptical of alternatives. When Anna suggested deviation, he bristled, not with anger, but withdrawal. Pride masked uncertainty. She sensed the danger Cronos had warned about, resistance not as hostility, but as conviction. Influence required patience, not insistence. As weeks passed, improvement became visible. Not mastery, but direction. Hans spoke less about institutions and more about technique. The change was subtle, almost forgettable, and that was its strength. Anna understood then. History rarely shifts through confrontation. It bends when attention moves elsewhere. For now, art had taken hold, and something else had loosened its grip. The disagreement did not begin loudly. It surfaced during a critique, quiet but firm. Anna suggested restraint where Hans pushed intensity. He questioned her approach, arguing that force gave work pre.
For Hans, compromise felt like surrender. For Anna, insistence felt dangerous.
He dismissed her guidance as cautious, outdated, too measured. Anna recognized the pattern immediately, pride shielding uncertainty. She corrected him once, carefully. He withdrew. Silence replaced dialogue. The sessions ended early. The space that art had occupied began to thin, and with it, the fragile balance they had built. Days passed without meeting. Hans stopped bringing his sketches. He spoke through others of moving on, of work that demanded belief rather than patience. Anna felt the risk sharpen. This was the moment Cronos had warned about, when resistance appeared not as hostility, but as resolve. Alone, Anna questioned her own influence. Teaching required timing, not authority. She understood that pressing further would harden him. Yet absence carried its own danger. Art had given him direction. Without it, old impulses could return. The line between distance and abandonment grew thin. Hans nearly quit, not dramatically, quietly. He avoided the tools, avoided the rooms, avoided the discipline that had steadied him. Doubt filled the space structure had held. He spoke of talent as destiny, of institutions as obstacles. Anna listened from afar, measuring when silence stopped helping. The fracture was complete, but not final. Time had not snapped, it had stretched. Anna understood then that success had occurred earlier, and this was its cost. The failure Cronos promised had arrived. Whether it would redirect the path or restore the old one depended on what followed. The reapproach did not come through words or intention. Anna did not look for Hans, did not explain herself, did not repair what had broken. She changed the environment instead. Fewer rules, different materials, longer silences. When they crossed paths again, it felt accidental, almost forgettable. That was important. Pride retreats more easily when it does not feel observed. Nothing was resolved, but something loosened, and that was enough to begin again. Hans returned cautiously, as if testing whether the space was still hostile. He spoke less, watched more. His movements were slower, less defensive. Anna offered no corrections unless asked. Guidance became optional rather than imposed. This shift altered the balance between them. Influence regained its effectiveness when it stopped resembling instruction. Hans responded not with gratitude, but with consistency, showing up, staying, working. They worked side by side now, not across from one another. Silence replaced debate. Mistakes were allowed to remain unfinished. Hans no longer defended every decision. He adjusted quietly, observing results instead of asserting intention. Art reclaimed its earlier role, not expression, not ideology, but focus. The discipline returned, subdued but stable. This version of progress was less visible, but more durable. Anna avoided principles and theory. She asked questions instead. What felt rigid? What resisted change? Why certain forms collapsed under pressure? Hans answered without certainty, sometimes contradicting himself mid-sentence. Doubt returned, but without panic. That distinction mattered. Uncertainty, Anna knew, was safer than conviction. It left space for redirection without confrontation. Nothing dramatic followed, no sudden improvement, no revelation, and that absence was the real shift. Hans stopped speaking about destiny and talent as absolutes. He spoke about process, about repetition, about failure as information rather than verdict. Language changes before behavior does. Anna recognized this pattern well. History, too, moved first in words before it moved in events. Anna understood then what Cronos meant by balance. The initial success had not been undone by failure, it had been corrected by it. The path had bent again, less sharply this time. History did not resist, it adjusted, and for now, it held. That was all she could ask of time. Not perfection, only stability. The second examination did not feel like a repetition of the first. It felt like a correction. Hans arrived carrying his portfolio with a posture that Anna immediately recognized as different from the year before. There was no rigid urgency in his movements, no silent demand for validation. Instead, there was preparation. Imperfect, cautious, but grounded. The waiting room held the same tension it always did, yet Hans no longer absorbed it as threat. He observed the space, the other candidates, the process itself. Art had begun to function as containment, not aspiration. Anna understood the significance of this before the exam even began. Desperation had loosened its grip, and in its place stood discipline. Anna took her seat, knowing that this time her role was not intervention, but restraint. In 1907, failure had been necessary. In 1908, absence was. She worked honestly, deliberately, without manipulating outcome. Her presence no longer needed to redirect events. It needed only to remain consistent. Around her, candidates repeated gestures shaped by anxiety and hope. Hans, however, worked in silence, attentive to proportion, structure, and balance. His drawings were not inspired. They were controlled. That distinction mattered more than originality. The qualities, once interpreted as limitation, had become anchors, guiding his hand away from excess and toward coherence. When the results were finally posted, the moment unfolded without ceremony. No announcement marked the shift. No voice declared success. Names appeared on paper, and history bent quietly. Hans found his name among those accepted, and stood still longer than necessary, reading it again as if to confirm its permanence. Relief did not erupt. It settled into him slowly, like weight redistributed rather than removed. Anna watched closely. This was not triumph. This was stabilization. Something volatile had found its boundary. The acceptance did not elevate him. It contained him, and containment, she knew, was the true victory. Outside the academy, celebration was minimal. A brief smile, a restrained acknowledgement. Hans thanked Anna without dramatization, not for changing his fate, but for remaining beside him during uncertainty. There was no gratitude shaped like devotion, no sense of debt. That absence mattered. Success had not created dependency, it had created independence. Hans spoke not of destiny or recognition, but of schedules, study, and work ahead. His future language had narrowed. It no longer reached for abstractions. It stayed grounded in tasks. Anna felt the shift immediately, not emotional, but structural. The branch Cronos had described had taken hold. Yet even in success, Anna felt tension return. Cronos had been explicit. No victory arrives without cost. The approval marked the moment of divergence, but divergence always destabilizes something else. She sensed the imbalance forming, not in Hans, but in the surrounding world. Expectations would change, pressure would redistribute, success would attract new demands. Time never permits clean solutions, it compensates elsewhere. Anna did not know where the cost would surface, only that it would, and that knowledge kept her still, observant, unwilling to confuse relief with completion. As they parted, Hans spoke of work as if it were refuge rather than obligation. The academy had not transformed him into something new. It had prevented him from becoming something else. Anna understood then what history rarely acknowledges. Catastrophe often begins not with ambition fulfilled, but with ambition denied and left to decay. The second examination had closed one door permanently, not by rejection, but by acceptance. And in doing so, it had quietly removed a future the world would never mourn, because it would never know it had existed. Cronos returned not with ceremony, but with inevitability. Anna did not feel herself being taken. The moment simply detached from continuity. One instant she was standing near the academy, the weight of success still settling around her, and the next, she stood outside time again. Cronos did not ask how she felt. He never did. He reminded her that the task was complete, not because approval had been granted, but because the trajectory had been redirected. This was the precise instant, he explained, where consequences could be observed without interference. What followed now was not choice, but result. Time had branched, and the branch was stable enough to be examined. Cronos showed her Hans's life unfolding without spectacle. The years at the academy were not brilliant, but consistent. Progress came slowly, marked by frustration, critique, and routine, rather than inspiration. When his parents died, grief arrived without collapse. Art absorbed the loss before it could calcify into bitterness. There were moments of isolation, financial strain, and obscurity, but none of them accumulated into resentment. Structure remained, discipline remained. He had learned to endure without needing an enemy to define himself against. Anna recognized this as the true divergence. Suffering still existed, but it no longer demanded an ideological outlet. After graduation, Hans opened a modest atelier, not a declaration of talent, but an extension of habit. He worked long hours, accepted commissions without pride, and refined his craft without obsession. Sales were irregular at first, then steady. Architecture, landscapes, commissioned interiors, enough to live, enough to continue. Patrons came not because he was visionary, but because he was reliable. Cronos emphasized this point without commentary. History does not require genius to shift direction. Sometimes it requires only sustainability, a life that does not collapse under its own unmet expectations. Wealth followed slowly, never excessively, but securely. Hans moved apartments, expanded his studio, traveled when necessary. His name circulated within galleries, not crowds. Influence never escaped its frame. Loss did not transform into grievance. Success did not inflate into entitlement. Anna watched carefully for signs of distortion, the hunger for recognition, the need to dominate narrative. None appeared. Cronos observed beside her, silent. "This man," he finally said, "will never become what your history remembers." The statement carried no relief, only finality. Cronos widened the vision beyond the individual. Without Hans as a focal point, resentment in post-war Europe dispersed rather than concentrated. Extremist ideas still emerged, but fractured, lacking cohesion and leadership. National humiliation found no single voice sharp enough to convert despair into command. Movements rose and fell without momentum. Politics remained unstable, but never catastrophic. Anna understood now that the absence of a tyrant did not require the absence of hatred, only the absence of someone capable of organizing it efficiently. "This world is not better," Cronos said as the vision slowed. "It is balanced differently." Injustice remained, conflict persisted, but the machinery of annihilation never assembled. Millions lived lives so ordinary they never entered history books. Anna felt the weight of that absence. Saved lives do not announce themselves. Prevented catastrophes leave no monuments. Cronos ended the vision without asking if it was worth it. Time had accepted the change. Judgment, as always, would belong to those who lived inside it. Without Hans, resentment in Europe never found a center of gravity. The humiliation that followed war still existed, as did poverty, unemployment, and fear of social collapse. But none of it condensed into a single figure capable of transforming collective frustration into unified direction. Hatred remained scattered, fragmented, unable to organize itself into a historical force. Extremist ideas surfaced and faded like background noise, loud but unsustainable. The absence was not felt as relief because no one knew what had been avoided. The world did not celebrate. It simply continued, unaware that a catalyst had been removed before the reaction could begin. European politics remained unstable, marked by internal disputes and repeated attempts at reconstruction. Governments fell, ideologies competed, yet none acquired the efficiency required to dominate the collective imagination. Without a leader capable of simplifying chaos into narrative, despair remained too complex to be weaponized. History moved forward unevenly, slowly, often frustratingly. That slowness acted as restraint. Movements that would have expanded explosively in another timeline exhausted themselves in contradiction. Fear never found discipline. Anger never found command. The absence of a face prevented ideology from becoming machinery. World War II, as it existed in another reality, never formed. Regional conflicts still emerged. Borders were contested. Diplomatic tensions erupted into violence. But the mechanism of total war was never assembled. There was no industrial mobilization for mass destruction. No cities reduced entirely to ash. Humanity never learned how to kill with assembly line efficiency. Millions lived ordinary lives, neither heroic nor tragic, simply uninterrupted. History lost its bloodiest chapter, and with it, the brutal clarity that catastrophe often forces upon societies willing to confront themselves only after collapse. Without Nazism, systematic genocide never materialized. Persecuted communities still faced prejudice, exclusion, and violence, but not annihilation engineered as state policy. This absence reshaped global memory profoundly. There was no singular symbol of modern evil. Hatred remained diffuse, harder to identify, and paradoxically harder to confront. The world became less traumatized, but also less vigilant. Without the shock of absolute barbarism, some injustices endured longer. lacking the moral rupture that forces societies to draw irreversible lines. Scientific and technological progress followed a different rhythm. Without total war, innovation lacked forced acceleration. Advances occurred gradually, guided by daily necessity rather than strategic survival. Lives were spared, transformations were delayed. The world became less efficient at destruction, but also slower at reconstruction. The price of quiet peace was the absence of rupture. Anna understood then that preventing catastrophe does not create an ideal world. It creates one where problems persist longer, diluted, never exploding violently enough to demand immediate resolution. Cronos did not call this victory. He called it equilibrium. The world remained imperfect, unequal, and conflicted, but without the trauma that would have defined entire generations. Millions lived lives never recorded in history books, precisely because they never had to survive the unimaginable. Anna felt the weight of that normality. A saved world does not celebrate, it simply continues. And perhaps that is the true cost of preventing the worst, living without ever knowing how close humanity came to the edge. Miriam woke in her bed as if nothing had happened. Morning light filtered through the familiar window, casting ordinary shadows across familiar walls. The weight of her body felt unchanged. The room smelled the same. For a long moment, she remained still, suspended between certainty and doubt. The memories were there, but they lacked texture, as dreams often do when daylight begins to interfere. Vienna felt distant. Cronos felt unreal. She told herself that the mind, when burdened with too much history, sometimes invents meaning to survive it. That explanation was comforting. It allowed the world to return to scale. The day unfolded normally. She prepared coffee, she answered emails. She stepped into her classroom and spoke about composition, proportion, and restraint. Her voice did not betray her uncertainty. Students listened. Questions were asked. Life continued with indifference to metaphysics, yet something felt displaced, not missing, altered. Miriam noticed pauses where none had existed before. She hesitated before correcting a sketch, before choosing a word, as if another version of herself stood just behind her decisions, watching. The sensation was subtle, persistent, and deeply unsettling. By afternoon, doubt had settled into denial. She considered the possibility that the experience had been a psychological fracture, the mind stitching together fear and knowledge into narrative. History weighed heavily on her life long before Cronos ever appeared. Perhaps this was simply exhaustion given form. Perhaps the brain, desperate for agency, had written itself a story where intervention was possible. That explanation felt rational, necessary. Miriam accepted it provisionally, the way one accepts an uncertain diagnosis while waiting for evidence. The evidence arrived quietly. In the library, she passed a shelf she had never paid attention to before. A book bound in dark cloth caught her eye. German. Without thinking, she read the title, perfectly, instantly. There was no translation happening in her mind. No effort, meaning arrived whole. Miriam froze. She read another line, then another. Fluency without memory, knowledge without origin. The room did not change, but something inside her did. Dreams do not leave residue. This had. Understanding came without emotion, not relief, not fear, confirmation. What she had lived was not imagination. Time does not gift skills as metaphors. Cronos had kept his word. She had returned when the task was complete. Her world remained untouched, exactly as promised. Only she carried the proof. Only she bore the memory of a world that never needed to exist. The weight of that knowledge did not feel heroic. It felt isolating. This was the final cost, to remember alone. That night, Miriam lay awake, staring at the ceiling, resisting the urge to assign meaning where none was offered. Cronos had never asked for belief, only acceptance. The timeline she altered would continue without her, unaware it had been spared. Her own world would continue unchanged, unaware of how close history had come to repeating itself. Somewhere, another version of reality unfolded quietly. Miriam closed her eyes, not in peace, but in resolve. Time had moved on. She would have to do the same. The world you know feels solid because you inherited it, not because it was inevitable. Every era stands on decisions so small they were never recorded, never questioned, never revisited. This was the unwritten story where a man was accepted into art school and World War II never happened. A reminder that history does not always turn on battles or speeches, but on moments so quiet they barely feel real. If this version of reality made you pause, like the video, subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and tell us where you're watching from. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the world not as it is, but as it almost wasn't. Then open them again and confront the question history never allows us to test.
What if?